are live, Chairman.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to this North Western Area Planning Committee meeting on today, Wednesday, the 21st of October 2020. My name's Councillor Mrs. Maddie Thompson. I'm the chairman of this committee. I'm actually going to go off piste for a moment because this is in fact the last North West before the statutory annual. And I would like to thank at the beginning rather than the end when everyone's in a rush to get off. I would like to thank all the officers and the members for all their work and support and everything they've done over this last actually year and a half. Right, back to the script. This meeting is held under new regulations which came into effect on 4th of April in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There are just a few housekeeping issues to run through. First of all, please could I ask everyone present in the meeting to ensure your microphone remains muted and your video feed off when not addressing the committee. This will help reduce background noises and avoid any unintentional disturbances. The meeting is being hosted remotely, streamed live and recorded, and by being present in the meeting, you're giving your consent to being recorded. Members and officers, during each item, please use the chat function of the meeting to indicate if you wish to speak. I will then invite you at the appropriate time. Members are reminded that apart from indicating you wish to speak or that you have to leave the meeting, the chat function should not be used for questions or any other purpose. Members, when speaking and referring to agenda papers, please reference a page or paragraph number and keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible. When invited to speak, please ensure you turn on your microphone and video if that's possible. Now, may I ask officers taking part to introduce themselves, starting off with Mr. Lee.
Good evening, members. I'm Matthew Lee, Lead Specialist Place and Chief Planning Officer at Malden District Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we haven't got Mr. Johnson after all. So
that's correct.
Moving on, Ms. Bowles, please.
Good evening. I'm Hannah Bowles. I'm a specialist in development management.
Thank you. Ms. Parker-Haynes, please.
Members, I'm Hayley Parker-Haynes and I'm a senior caseworker in development management.
Thank you. Ms. Fuller?
Good evening, members. My name is Katie Fuller. I'm clerk to this evening's committee.
Thank you. Any other officers present as part of this meeting as opposed to supporting it? Thank you. Katie, could you please carry out a roll call of members to confirm who is in attendance?
Yes, Chairman. Members, I will call your name in alphabetical order. Please could you indicate if you are present, starting with Councillor Bamford.
Thank you. I'm here. Sorry, I am at the meeting and welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Durham. No.
Yes, I'm present and correct. And yes, good evening all.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Fleming.
Hi, yes, present.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
Evening, Katie. Members, Chairman.
Good evening. Councillor Morley.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, present. Thank you.
Good evening. Councillor Siddle.
Good evening, Katie. Present.
Good evening. Councillor Mrs. Thompson.
I'm certainly here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Miss White.
Good evening. I'm present.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know there's one other member present just attending the meeting. So, Councillor Morris, would you care to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everybody, and welcome.
Good evening. I've just spotted Councillor Stamp as well.
Yeah.
Would you introduce
Thank you,
yourself?
Chairman. Yes, please. Thank you, Chairman. I'm also listening. Councillor Wendy Stamp.
That's Councillor Wendy Stamp. Thank you. Is there anyone else, any other member in attendance that nobody's mentioned yet? Nope. Okay, thank you. Moving on. Apologies for absence. I think we're a full house, are we, Katie?
No, we have apologies from Councillor Keys.
Oh, yes. How could I not notice? Thank you. Right, minutes of the 23rd of September. It's recommended that the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of September, found on pages 7 to 12, are approved as a true and accurate record. Members, may I take them as read? Please
Agreed.
Let me know.
Agreed.
Please let me know if not.
Agreed.
Can we agree them by assent?
Agreed, Chairman.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yes, happy to do that.
Right, so I will take those as agreed and sign them in the fullness of time. Thank you. Right, declarations of interest, item 4. I have to read this bit out. To disclose the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interests, other pecuniary interests, or non-pecuniary interests relating to items of business on the agenda, having regard to paragraphs 6 to 8, inclusive of the Code of Conduct for members. Members are reminded they're also required to disclose any such interests as soon as they become aware, should the need arise during the meeting. Councillor Durham, I'm sure you have your usual.
Yes, I'm just logging in. Yes, good evening. I have a non-pecuniary interest as a member of Essex County Council who are statutory consultees on planning matters. I also need to declare that I have a pecuniary interest on item 6 on the basis that the estate is my next door neighbour and my parents are landowners on some of the land that this application refers. So, Chairman, with your permission, I will leave the meeting permanently after the first item.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have Councillor Bamford.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a non-pecuniary interest in agenda item 6, as I know Mark Durham's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Durham, who live on the estate.
Thank you. Actually, for that matter, then I'd better include myself. I too know Mr. and Mrs. Durham, only socially. Any other declarations? Okay, thank you. Moving on. The first item of planning is item 5 on our agenda, Lodge Farm, Lodge Road, Paisley. The details can be found on pages 13 to 26. In a moment, I will call on the officer to present this item. I do know we have a member of the public who is hoping to speak. That would be Mr. Ford, the agent. I'm being asked if we could adjourn for a moment in order to, I can't read the rest of it, sorry Tara, but to sort out the technical issues for Mr. Ford, I presume. Members, I'm going to assume your agreement and adjourn the meeting at 18:08 for 5 minutes. We'll be back at 18:13.
Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I won't go through the housekeeping again as it's only been 5 minutes. I do apologise for the gap, but we do in fact have Mr. Ford, so he will be able to speak in person. But first we will have the presentation, please. Thank you. That's Ms. Bowles, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. So planning permission is sought for the removal of condition 2 on a 2014 application, which granted permission for a replacement dwelling at the application site. The removal of the condition will allow for the retention of the original dwelling, which is proposed to be used as ancillary accommodation to the replacement dwelling. Here we have the location plan. It should be noted that the red outline indicates the land within the ownership of the applicant and does not represent the residential curtilage. Plot plan. Here you can see the replacement dwelling, and here is the original dwelling proposed to be retained. The elevations of the original dwelling. the floor and roof plans. As part of the justification for the retention of the original dwelling, the applicant has proposed to surrender their permitted development rights under Class A of the GPDO. This illustrative plan indicates what they believe could lawfully be built under permitted development. However, as discussed within paragraphs 5.2.7 and 5.2.8 of the report, a lawful development certificate to confirm if the proposed extension shown on the plan would be lawful has not been submitted, and it was not considered necessary to remove these permitted development rights at the time of approving the replacement dwelling. This would not justify the retention of the original dwelling. And we've got some site photos. You can see the original dwelling along the top, the area to the rear of the original dwelling, the access track which provides access to the original dwelling and the replacement dwelling, which you can see in the distance. Then we have some photos of the replacement dwelling. I've got more pictures of the replacement dwelling, and a view of the original dwelling from the road, and an aerial view which shows the level of built form currently on the site. The application site lies outside of the settlement boundaries of the district where policies of restraint apply. In order to protect the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, it should be free from unnecessary development. A lack of justification and evidence has been provided to support the removal of the condition. As highlighted within the report, the replacement dwelling accommodates an integral annex, and the proposal fails to comply with the criteria set out in the Specialist Housing Needs SPD for annex accommodation for a number of reasons, which includes the failure to demonstrate that the original dwelling would be used in an ancillary nature. The retention of the original dwelling would result in the site appearing to occupy two residential dwellings, resulting in an intrusion and intensification of the residential development, eroding the character and appearance of the rural site and area. Therefore, for these reasons, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In line with the public participation scheme, I will invite Mr. Ford in just a moment. Are we all ready? Do we have the timer on screen, please? Tara, Katie?
Yes, Chairman. I have a 2-minute timer set up. Thank you very much.
Can we, do you put that on a shared screen so that...
No, you'll just hear it.
We will just hear it. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Ford, you will hear an alarm sound at the end of your 2 minutes, and as always, I do stick to that absolutely rigidly. So, Mr. Ford, in your own time, please start, and that's when we'll start the timer.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your patience with the technical issues. Planning permission to replace the original cottages was granted in 2014. Condition 2 required demolition of the cottage following occupation of the new dwelling. Rather unusually, the current application seeks to retain the original cottage, but there's a very good reason why. The main reason is it wasn't realised at the time of granting the 2014 permission that the original cottage is of 17th century origin. This was discovered by the council's conservation officer, who, in view of the historic provenance of the building, was keen to see it retained. The application is further accompanied by an independent heritage assessment, which indeed confirms the dwelling is worthy of listing. The cottage has been previously extended, and some additions and alterations have not been undertaken sympathetically. However, in seeking the dwelling's retention, the applicant will make restorative enhancements, including replacing the UPVC windows with historically appropriate windows, removing the modern conservatory, and carefully repointing the external brickwork. The council's conservation officer, Tim, has provided a consultation response which raises no objections, welcoming the retention of the dwelling and supporting the enhancements. Similarly, the parish council support the proposal to retain the dwelling. They have requested a condition is imposed that restricts the dwelling to ancillary use. This condition is acceptable to the applicant, and the application is accompanied by a unilateral undertaking confirming the dwelling will be ancillary to the main house in perpetuity and cannot be sold separately. In addition, in granting the planning permission for the replacement dwelling, the council did not remove the new dwelling PD rights. Such PD extensions are considerably greater in scale and massing than the original cottage, and would be more apparent in the landscape. As such, it is proposed to surrender these generous PD rights to give something back, and hence further shift the balance in favour of granting planning permission. The cottage is particularly well screened from public viewpoints, and its historic importance is worthy of protection in the public interest. This is an unusual case and worthy of a healthy debate, such as took place at the Parish Council.
Thank you.
We are concerned that the planning officer has not given way to
No,
these
I'm
unique...
sorry, that's for 2 minutes, Mr. Ford.
Oh, is it? Sorry.
Sorry,
I can't see the timer from where I'm sat.
I wasn't sure what sound. I wasn't sure what sound I'd receive. I would see it.
I'm grateful. I'll stop talking. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ford, and goodbye. Hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting. Right, Councillor Durham, you actually called that in as ward member. Paisley's in your ward, isn't it? Yours and Councillor Jarvis. So I'll let you start unless you prefer to wait.
No, I did call this in, Chairman, but it does prove to be a dilemma. And I called it in because there were circumstances whereby I didn't think that perhaps the full case had been looked into. However, I'm very, very concerned about a precedent in this case. We very often we have applications for replacement of existing dwellings, and as is the norm, the condition is that the existing building is removed. I'm aware of several cases, particularly locally, some in the village where I live, where subsequent applications had been made to retain the existing building, and all of those were refused. And I have to therefore stand up for the policies in our local development plan, and that effectively makes this a new dwelling. I also have to ask myself, if we were faced with just the new dwelling in isolation, and there was an application for this as a new annex, would we have granted it? And I suspect not. So I'm keeping my my mind open. I'd like to hear what other people's views are, but members will know my strenuous defence of the local development plan, and at the moment that is the direction that I'm going. Thank you.
Right, I do have Councillor Bamford to speak, but I have a question from Councillor Fleming, so that might be pertinent to all of us. I hope, Councillor Bamford, you'll let me ask Councillor Fleming a question.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask the officers why, when permission was granted, why the replacement dwelling wasn't cited on the original house, basically. Why it was set some way back. Because I understand the norm would be to agree to it being removed and then the replacement dwelling to go on the same footprint, albeit slightly larger. Would that be the case, Matt?
Through you, Chairman, not necessarily no. In most instances, the physicality means that has to be the situation. But as Councillor Durham was explaining, we do get a number per year of applications like this, and that's why the condition requiring the demolition. Obviously, sites may change, land uses may change over the years, and the historic siting of the a dwelling, which may have been logical at the time, may change. So when people look to redevelop a site, they do at times look to relocate the site, and there's nothing in our policy that objects to that. It just requires that we retain one dwelling on site. So that's why we always use the condition that has been used in this case. Thank you, Chairman. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Thank you.
It's not uncommon, in fact, not least because sometimes people need to live in the one while they build the other and then move. Right, so Councillor Bamford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to query the proposal, because the proposal is the removal of condition 2, which is the demolition of the existing dwelling. But also there in the proposal, it says the variation of condition 2. And I assume that that work, that variation, has been done. It's new detached double garage, conversion of existing bungalow garage to residential family room. So because we've already agreed that condition 2, that work presumably has already been carried out anyway. I just want to clarify that, or are we being asked to change something else? Thank you.
Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. This is where things can get a little bit complicated in planning. The granting of planning permission obviously creates permission. There's a suite of conditions normally imposed against it. When you apply to vary a condition, or as we use the terminology vary condition, you're actually applying to not to undertake development not in compliance with that condition. So in this case, the 2009 permission had a condition in relation to probably in reality at the time it would have been plans, because that's traditionally what condition 2 is. Subsequently in 2014 an application was submitted to vary that condition. So in reality it removed that condition and imposed a new one. So that condition meant that the applicant in reality could either have built out a permission that was granted in 2009 or a permission was granted in 2014. What I'm guessing, and it is a informed guess, is that the reason this has become condition 2 was that a shovel of the 2009 permission had been put in the ground, and that would also be logical because of the fact that 5 years had passed when a permission normally lasts for 3. So that original condition, condition 1, which is must be complied within 3 years, would have disappeared. So the 2009 permission, condition 3, probably was must get rid of the house. That moved up 1 in the 2014 permission. So the whole building and everything has been built. The dwelling is being occupied, and they should have demolished the current or the original dwelling. If members or officers or decision makers we grant an application such as this, officers need to go through all the original conditions that were put in on the 2014 permission to see which ones are still fit for purpose and should be retained, and also impose any additional conditions. So in this case it would be something such as retain the annex. The trouble is, obviously, as the officer's report is, we don't think it can be ancillary, but in theory that's the idea. So we would remove any conditions that are no longer fit for purpose, if any, and we would impose any new conditions that were required due to changing circumstances or the implications of this application. I hope that's sort of explained the question, probably a bit too long-winded than you needed. Thanks a lot.
I think I've got it. Councillor
Chairman, can I come back? Because I didn't really understand. What I was trying to say was, if this committee was mindful of overturning what the officers are recommending, would that cause an issue with this variation of condition 2, where works presumably have been completed?
Mr. Lee.
Through you, Chairman, I was trying to explain the 2000, we're looking at an application that is a variation to a 2014 permission. That's description was a variation to a 2009 permission. So there are 2 permissions in existence, one from 2009, one 2014. This would vary the 2014 permission to create a application from this year. It wouldn't cause any issues in relation to the development that has been built, because, as I said, we would go through the conditions, see which were still fit for purpose. Certain ones would fall away and no longer be relevant, but it wouldn't cause any issue in that respect. This application solely, matter of consideration is the retention of the existing dwelling, acceptable or not. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just come back to say that, that wasn't clear in the report. That's why I asked, and I just wondered why you'd made that point of putting this detail of the variation of condition 2 in the proposal. That's why I queried it, because it doesn't mention anything about this in the actual report. So I just queried whether there was something that we needed to consider. But obviously you've explained it very well, Matt. Thank you very much. I understand now.
Thank you. Right, next to speak I have Councillor Jarvis, who is the other ward members, if we're talking about Hazley. So, Councillor Jarvis.
Thank you very much, Chairman, members. I do remember this application coming up at the parish, so I had the opportunity to listen then to some debate on it. And I've obviously read the report. I've got a few questions. Can we just look at the photograph again, just to sort of get a feel for the size of the property, the annex, compared to the new build? Just I think there was one photograph, aerial photograph, that showed that, Katie?
Yes, that would be helpful, please, Katie. Or whoever.
Ms. Bowles, can you bring that up, please?
I'm sorry. Thank you. So I was looking at the sort of lower right photograph there. I think if I'm right, I don't know if you've got a pointer system you can use or not, but I'm just sort of trying to identify. Oh, thank you. The sort of cottage which is now they're asking for it to be auxiliary. Yes, that's the sort of size of the cottage, and the size of the new property is obviously the new property, the new build. That's obviously basically the rest of it. Okay, so just to get things in proportion, you know, the old cottage, which the applicant is asking, could that be used as a sort of annex, is significantly smaller than the new.
Oh, you're breaking up, Councillor Jarvis. Would it be helpful if you went audio only? No, I'm sorry, Councillor Jarvis. We can't hear you, or at least I can't.
No, nor can I, Chairman.
Neither can I, Chairman.
I'm sorry, Councillor Jarvis. Would it be helpful if could you leave and come back, or try turning off your video, or turn off your incoming video?
It would have been strong objection.
Chairman, he can't leave and come back. Right.
Right, Councillor Jarvis, sorry, you've become clearer again, but I'm afraid we missed rather a lot of what you said for the last couple of minutes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, it wasn't apparent to me that I had gone anywhere. I was really just talking about the size of the old property compared to the new property, and I was asking Officer Lee if he could sort of comment as to had the application for the new development included the old cottage as an annex. Does he think that would have caused considerable harm to the countryside, essentially?
Mr. Lee, actually, I would find the previous slide of photos quite helpful too, if we could flip to that one. So, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. I think obviously there's two issues. Obviously, our policy accepts the demolition of an existing dwelling and replacement with a new one, whether that's on site or whether that is, you know, Cheek and Jow or, you know, somewhere different in the site. Yeah. The policy obviously then therefore requires that, and therefore, in my opinion, obviously, well, not obviously, but I wasn't here in 2009, and while I was here in 2014, I was only in South East, so I wasn't dealing with either of these applications, so I don't know any detail specifically, but my professional opinion would be that an objection would have been raised either or of those applications, because this application would have resulted in the appearance of two dwellings within the site, which is contrary to policy. The fact that the property is much smaller than the existing property shouldn't be a consideration for the termination of this application, a point of principle, because to take this slightly perversely and just to take members' minds through this, that would be similar to arguing that if you had a very large property, we should be allowing them all to build an extra dwelling in their land because it's a lot smaller, so it's not a problem. So that's the sort of the thought process of this. You know, the fact that there would be two dwellings on this property, on this plot of land, however big the plot of land is contrary to policy and goes to the heart of what our policies look to resist. Secondly, the other thing as highlighted within the officer's report is the need for an annex to be ancillary. There has to be a strong relationship between the main dwelling and an ancillary use. That's why there's no case law is clear that just because there are all the day-to-day facilities for living doesn't stop it from being an annex, but you should still be able to strongly interrelate. So meals should still be taken in the main dwelling. You would not normally expect it to be a dwelling of this scale, irrespective of how much smaller it is still a relatively large property. And officers, and myself included, are very reticent to support a scheme of this scale as an ancillary nature on the simple fact that it isn't ancillary. Therefore, a condition requiring it to be ancillary would be perverse. It wouldn't actually arguably work, and we could end up in a situation where actually, legally, by allowing this, we're automatically creating a dwelling because the condition doesn't meet the 6 tests. And if we impose a condition that doesn't meet one of the 6 tests which are laid out through law, that condition just disappears. It doesn't exist. It's found to be unreasonable. No 6 tests are necessary. Well, yes, it is. Precise. Yes, it is. We could word that. Is it enforceable? Well, that's where it gets a bit questionable because of the fact that actually it's not ancillary in the first place. Is it relevant to planning? Well, yes, it would be. Is it relevant to the permit development? Yes. Is it reasonable? Well, no, because it can't be done. So for 2 reasons, that condition wouldn't meet the test. So it basically wouldn't exist. So what we would be granting is a new dwelling on this site. However, they may interrelate the occupier today. I'm not trying to, as quite often as I sometimes think people think I'm trying to say applicants are lying or they're bending the truth or anything. And I'm not, and I never am, but planning has to look at the lifetime of the development. So irrespective of how the applicant may wish to use that building today, tomorrow, next year, circumstances change, owners change, physical situations change. And what would happen is, in reality, in 5, 10, 15 days, weeks, years, however long, we would end up within a separate dwelling where it would be very hard to be able to say that, sorry, policy or condition stops that. And that's the reality of the situation. That's why this officer's report goes into quite detail on that and tries to explain that matter. And I hope that I've done it some justice. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just come back on that, Chairman? Would that be okay?
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you, Officer Lee. That was obviously very well explained. It's just that looking at it, it obviously seems a great shame if there is a small 17th century cottage that doesn't look to be a huge blot on the landscape, so to speak, that obviously would be used. It seems a shame to have to, the conservation officers are happy and the parish is happy. It seems a shame to sort of insist on it being knocked down because it doesn't sort of measure up to those sort of planning policies, although I appreciate they're very important. I just wonder if there is a way around it. It sounds to me as if you're saying the applicant would be better off in some way asking for permission for the old dwelling to be a new dwelling. And I'm just wondering if there's a way around it, because from what you're saying, if you feel there isn't and the property needs to be taken down, that just seems a great shame that there isn't a way around that, because it doesn't look a considerable property and it doesn't look as if it's very intrusive on the countryside. And I'm very much, as you know, a believer in looking at each case on its own merits. And I think in this case, looking at it from a sort of common sense point of view, I realise that's not necessarily the same as planning, but from a common sense point of view, it looks a bit of a shame to insist on 17th century property being knocked down. But I hear what you say. Thank you very much for your comments, Officer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. I do have Councillor Durham waiting to come back, but just looking at this photo, is it possible to tell which bits of the original building were original and which bit are extensions? Because I would never look at that and think 17th century cottage.
Through you, Chairman. I'm just trying to read through the consultation response, and I haven't read through it all in detail, but one of the sentence that's just jumped at me right in the middle of the first paragraph is: the overall significance of the house is limited because of the degree to which it has been altered in the 20th century. All evidence for original openings has been obscured by later alterations. Indeed, at a glance, the house has the appearance of an unexceptional mid-20th century dwelling. So I would think that maybe the applicant has tried to push forward the historic significance of the building as a material consideration at a greater weight than maybe officers would recommend that we considered it as. That would be my advice, members. And if you actually read Mr. Howson's response, it isn't particularly favourable of retaining the dwelling for its historic impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I was almost wondering if I was looking at the right building. However, Councillor Durham, please come back.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman. And yes, I think Mr. Lee's explanation is excellent. the house where I'm sitting goes back to that sort of time, but the bit I'm sitting in is 20th stroke 21st century, and I think that is a very tenuous excuse. I think we have to ask ourselves a couple of things. The owners, when they have made the application for the new dwelling, will have been fully aware that it would have been a criteria to remove the existing dwelling, because they're applying for, and I quote, a replacement dwelling. So that is, you sacrifice one for the other. Now we see dozens and dozens and dozens of these, particularly actually in the Wycombe Bishops area, where it's the removal of the original building, and the owner continues to live in that until the new one is built, and then they knock down the existing. The other point I'd like to make is that, ignoring the building that is there, if the owners of the new property applied for an annex, and the reason that most people apply for an annex is if they have elderly or infirm relations or whatever, and they want them very close at hand. Would that be the size and scale of what is there now? No, it wouldn't. And it would be very much ancillary. And with the best will in the world, there is no physical way that this can realistically be ancillary to the main building. So it is with a heavy heart. And I don't like seeing things demolished, but this would have been the understanding right from word go. And to say that it's, 17th century, I mean, let's look at it. It's in Mr. Lee's words, unexceptional. I'd say it's very unexceptional, nice house and all that. But to overturn on this that it has historic value, even the conservation officer acknowledges the fact that what was there once is now hidden, if not destroyed. So I honestly think that there is no way that this could be regarded as being ancillary, and I'm leaning strongly towards that view. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd also add, certainly in my ward, I can think of one that was quoted twice as a replacement dwelling, so it's actually a 2-for-1 and it's still there. And another one where there was an application to rebuild on the original site, even though another dwelling had been built. So, yes, I'm very unhappy about the prospect of this staying, I must say. So, no one else has asked to speak, so I will, in fact, I usually do this earlier, but I will, in fact, put the office...
Sorry, Chairman, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I expected to see you on the chat. Sorry. Councillor White, please. I didn't mean to cut you out.
That's okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to say that I was shadowing my ward member at the time this application came up. So although I didn't sit on the committee, I remember it very well. And I seem to recall from the correspondence that he received that the reason they wanted to build an annex was it was difficult to access, it was damp, it was cold, it was impractical to bring it up to date. Hence, they wanted a modern building that was going to be easy maintained. So that was the first one. Now, normally I support houses in the countryside. Normally I try and support rural villages because I think growth is good. But we've had so many of these applications over the years where we've agreed to move the dwellings generally into the middle of a field or middle of a plot. And I've generally supported them. But then quite a few of them have come back. And so we want to now keep the original. And I'm going to stand by what we've always done in these cases, is say, well, no, because you only got permission for the new one because you were going to surrender the old one. And the other thing is, under 5.2.2, this isn't even on the non-designated heritage sites, which it could have been, or if it was of merit, it should have been, even if it didn't merit listing. So for me, I actually can't support this. I think it's being a bit cheeky because it's, but back in the day, they actually said the house wasn't suitable to live in and it was too expensive to bring it up to date. And yet suddenly, I don't know what, 11 years later, it's perfectly all right and there's no mention of it. So they were saying it needed to be demolished in 2009. So I can only go by that I expect that it needs to be demolished. And we will set a difficult precedent because we won't be able to defend any of the future ones going forward where we allow a replacement dwelling. And as I say, I'm normally the person who supports rural dwellings, but in this case, I think it would be dangerous to support it. And I agree with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, that's helpful. Right then, members, I don't believe I've missed anyone else. So I'm going to put the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Lots of lights came on. Sorry, who was first? Oh, well.
I think I might have been.
Okay, Katie, as soon as you've got someone.
Yeah.
Right, let's put that to the vote. I think we'd better do a roll call from judging by the various opinions I've heard. So, Katie, could we do a roll call, please? We are voting on the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you, Chairman. So we're voting to refuse the application as per the officer's recommendation. Members, I'll take your names in alphabetical order. Please could you indicate whether you are for, against or abstain. Starting with Councillor Bamford, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Durham.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Fleming.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
With a slight heavy heart, for.
Thank you. Councillor Morley.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Fiddle.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Thompson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Miss White.
For.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That is 7 for, none against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. So that leaves that application for Lodge Farm is refused in line with the officer's recommendation. Thank you. Right, the next item is the TPO at the Warren Golf Club. So, Councillor Durham,
Chairman, yes, having declared an interest, I will now leave you. Have a lovely evening,
the last item. You'll be pleased to hear there is no urgent business, so we won't need to see you back.
I'm very glad to hear that, and thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. See you on the other side.
Quite so. Thank you, Councillor Durham. So we're at agenda item 6, which is the Tree Preservation Order 6/20, Warren Golf Club, including Bunsey Downs and Badgers, Wood and Water. It's found on pages 27 to 34. In a moment, I'll call on the officer to present the item. Members, a reminder that if you wish to speak on this item, please make it known using the chat function. As you've spotted, I'm not necessarily that good at seeing the hands up, but please challenge me if I miss you. Here we go. Ms. Parker-Haynes, please.
Thank you,
yes, I've got the Council advance.
In October 2018, the Council received reports of inappropriate and unjustified arboricultural works taking place within the Warren estate. These works were considered to put the trees at risk, and an initial tempo assessment scored the area of trees 23 out of 25 and concluded that the woodland was worthy of a tree preservation order, and an area TPO was served on the 29th of October 2018. However, following further site visits by the Malden District Council's tree consultant and a planning officer, specific trees, groups of trees and woodlands worthy of retention were identified. The emergency TPO was therefore revoked, and a new, more specific TPO, 4 of 19, was served on the 26th of April 2019. The tempo assessment scored the more specific TPO, 20 out of 25, and concluded that the woodland was worthy of a tree preservation order. Consequently, as a result of further site visits following additional inappropriate works having been carried out and the loss of several trees due to weather conditions, TPO 4 of 19 was revoked and TPO 6 of 20 was served. One objection was received and has not been resolved, and therefore the question of whether or not to confirm the TPO has been brought before members to decide. This is an aerial overlay of the TPO map. Here are some photos of the trees from within the street scene. Here are some photos of the trees within the site. And here are some examples of some inappropriate works which have been carried out after serving the first initial TPO. Given the maturity of the trees and the prominent location within the estate and surrounding area, it is considered that this woodland landscape plays a significant role in underscoring the value of the visual amenity of the surrounding area. It is therefore recommended that the tree preservation order is confirmed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we don't have anyone to speak on this, and we don't. Well, we do have a tree expert, but she's actually an amateur, Councillor White. Right, who would like to speak first?
I'm happy to speak on this one. Bearing in mind, I seem to be involved in this a lot.
Sorry, I must apologise. I've got Councillor Bamford. Oh, hang on. Yes, Councillor Bamford, Councillor Jarvis, Councillor Morley. Sorry, but I will come to you, Councillor White, of course. Councillor Bamford?
Sorry, Chairman, I thought you were going to take Councillor White first. I just wanted to ask the officers, at the point of 3.1.3 in this report, it says the objections remain unresolved, and that's why it's come to this committee. I just want to have some kind of explanation, really, as to why these objections remain unresolved and why we're having to look at this as a committee.
Mr. Lee? Or...
Through you, Chair, I'm just scrolling down to that section on the report.
I presume that would be the golf course objection.
Yep, I'd assume so. Sorry, my internet's having some trouble. I see.
Just while you're looking, Mr. Lee, my question would have been, if we had a tree officer, isn't what exactly was inappropriate? I mean, certainly some boughs were lopped off, but was there a reason? Were they dead? Were they dangerous?
Chairman, I can answer that. My understanding is that the technique, for want of a better word, that was used was rather arbitrary. It wasn't meeting the accepted British standards for works to trees.
Okay, thank you.
As the report explains, they haven't entered into a formal sort of plan to manage the trees or anything per se, and it does seem to be a little bit ad hoc. And yeah, the tree officer is quite concerned about some of the quality of the work that is being undertaken on the site. Sorry about that. What is it? The objection?
Sorry, Mr. Lee and Councillor Thompson. I can come back and answer that in a bit more in depth if you'd like, in relation to the wounds left.
Yes, be fine, as long as we do get the answer to Councillor Bamford's question at some point. What bits unresolved?
Yes, so thank you, Chairman. In relation to the inappropriate works, they've left large open wounds, which the tree won't be able to seal, which then leaves the tree open and vulnerable to decay. And the formation of the branches near the centre of the tree. So if the decay establishes at these points, it can then easily extend to the centre of the tree, which in turn compromises the structural integrity and longevity of the tree. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have an answer on the objection?
Yes.
Beyond the common sense one, do we have any more details?
Yeah, through you, Chairman. Paragraph 7.1.1 of the officer's report, it goes through the requirements.
Yeah, I've got you.
Sorry, not requirements. Goes through the objection. Some of them, to be honest, a little bit outdated and they're discredited, but they are taken through there. I'll give members a couple of minutes if they want just to familiarise themselves with that points rather than me just reading it out to them.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you. Members, are you?
Chairman, sorry, Chairman, may I just come back, because I have read the report. I just want to know why those objections are unresolved. I can see the objections, but why are they unresolved? Why have we had to consider it? Is what I really wanted to know.
Fair enough.
Through you, Chairman. Obviously, delegated authority only sits with officers if there are no unresolved objections. So normally that means objections if the objections are quite minor in nature. As you can see, certain things such as saying there is no scale, well, actually officers don't agree with that. There is a scale and they do think it's workable. And actually, to a certain extent, I think that objection may sit with a previous report. Like in relation to how the tree should, obviously, the second option or point, officers have said there is not a statutory requirement when serving the TPO to do this, and we've given the scale of the site and the map provided is considered suitable detail has been provided. They're saying that because the felling licence that there shouldn't necessarily have to be a TPO. But obviously we've gone into detail why that's not. They are totally separate pieces of legislation. And also that there are concerns about the validity of such a comment anyway in relation to the valid felling licence. So, for want of a better phrase, the officers or the council and the applicant have not been able to come to a reasonable compromise on these points. The owner of the trees or the owner of some of the majority of these trees, as we're all aware, it's more than one landowner. But the golf course have objected, and we haven't been able to satisfy their concerns, which I think just slightly unreasonable expectations maybe, and some uninformed opinion on relation to the felling licence. But for that reason, we have to bring it for members to confirm the TPO. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Does that mean that the applicant might have a right to appeal?
Chairman, the only way to challenge the serving of a TPO would be through a judicial review, which would be to say that the council has done something illegally in the process of serving the TPO, which to a certain extent becomes a moot point because it's quite formulaic. Once the TPO is served, though, is the applicant would have a right to submit an application for works for the tree. If the council refuse them, then they would have a right to that to appeal against that decision. But there isn't any expectation that we would say no to works happening in the future. It's just that after some of the recent work that has been undertaken, there are concerns about the trees, their longevity and the need to protect them. So there is no right appeal for the serving of the new TPO, but there is obviously against if we refuse any of the works. But I think that's covered in section 4.2 of the officer's report as well in some detail, but hopefully I've explained it in a little bit more detail than is in that section. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just a quick question, Mr. Lee. Should this all be, should the TPO be agreed and works were required by the tree owners, would that be relatively minor works? Would that need to come back to committee, or is that something that could be it's delegated and dealt with by the tree officer?
Really, Chairman. Obviously, all TPO's works start off as delegated to the council to officers. Yeah. So there wouldn't be any need for any of these works. I wouldn't have thought to come back for committee. But I do know Ms. Parker Haynes has raised hands. I don't know if she wants to expand on something I've said, if that's okay with you, Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Parker Haynes?
Thank you, Chairman. That was an old hand, sorry.
Okay. A legacy hand. Right, I have Councillor Morley. Oh, no, I have Councillor Jarvis next. Sorry. I do apologise, everybody. I'm getting lost on the list.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of trying to take all this in, but I mean, I think really we're looking at a whole range of TPOs that quite clearly should be being enforced. And you've got one objector, which is the golf course owner, seems to be merrily chopping down branches, probably in relation to the golf course and golf activities, perhaps, in a way which has been described by professionals as not a very appropriate way. So yeah, I'm struggling to find that there could be any sensible argument to do anything other than to reinforce that the TPOs should be in place and that we should defend them. And I'm struggling to see any argument that would convince me otherwise.
Fair enough. Thank you,
Chairman.
Councillor Morley.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Pretty much with your question, actually, Councillor Thompson, you were sort of asked it really, and it was just the inappropriate with the trees. But what was it, a safety reason? That was the thing. But I think that's been answered. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I mean, I understand that a branch may have to go if there's a safety aspect, but it was, if we're talking about the way it's been done, then my inclination is to say then, yes, we need to maintain the TPO.
I agree. Thank you.
Anybody else? Sorry, Miss White, I didn't wish to put you on Nelson to make a mistake. But...
that's okay, Madam Chair. Just to say, I generally don't support TPOs. I will make a note that on this one, they are actually trees rather than scrubs, so that's an improvement. I do have some slight concerns when the objector is saying that it's difficult to note which trees are covered. What I would say is, if it doesn't tie in with aerial photographs, should we defer this and redo the paperwork so it's accurate? That's my only thought, because they are trees. So I don't actually have an objection because they are trees, but I would have a problem if it's not accurate, because I know from experience it's difficult to find out which trees are covered. So I do think, to be fair to the landowners, and in case it goes to appeal, that we can say for certainty which trees are covered, and that this map will actually identify which trees and areas are covered, because it's not fair on the owner if it is ambiguous. I mean, I don't know. I don't know well enough whether you could tell, but I don't like the idea of an ambiguous map.
Okay, fair question, Mr. Lee. Do you?
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a very fair question, actually, because obviously the scale of the site, we've been quite conscious of the ability to actually accurately delineate and clearly identify the trees. And Ms. Parkins, can you show that aerial photograph that you've got that's showing the? I think was there one? So we've actually, as you can see here, I think this is an extract.
Is there any possibility of enlarging that?
I've zoomed in as much as I can on the actual PowerPoint, but I can zoom in on specific areas and hopefully move it around, and that should allow.
If I might come in on my iPad, I can just make it bigger with my fingers. It just opens out.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, no comment, But what I was going to say is, as officers, we actually, or not myself personally, but we have actually used GPS to go down and to actually make sure that this is very clear and accurate. Because we have had that objection before on one of the previous TPOs we served, as Ms. Parkins explained, and whilst we didn't think it was unusable, we did feel some sympathy for the applicants. We've actually gone a little bit above and beyond that we would have done to actually make this quite clear. So I think out of any TPO in the whole district, this is the one that we are most sure that you'd be able to clearly delineate and make sure is most accurate, with the exception of one that might be like an oak when there's only one oak tree in the front garden or something. But otherwise, I would say that this is, for something like this is as good as it's going to get. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I'll take some comfort from that. Councillor Jarvis wanted to come back. Oh, Councillor Weiss, is that a legacy hand?
Oh, yes, sorry, it's legacy
hand. Or did you want to come back? Okay. Councillor Jarvis, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, I saw reference to a sort of 5-year plan, which sounds very sensible. Could obviously just comment on whether the golf course owners have engaged at all in agreeing or a sort of plan, a 5-year plan? I mean, or is this something that we have asked for and they just haven't responded? Could you just comment on that? Because that seems to be perhaps what's missing here.
Through you, Chairman, so I've not been privileged to the conversation, so I wouldn't want to go too far, but my understanding is that officers have been quite clear in the fact that a long-term sort of management plan would be something that we would be looking for, would help us in being confident of the management of the trees going forward, and that hasn't come forward. But as the officer's report explains, that can actually even be, they can submit one of them under a TPO anyway. So we have tried to get something like that, but nothing like that has been come forward at the moment. But I wouldn't really want to say much more than that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Morley, your video is on, by the way. I don't know if your microphone is.
Chairman, through you, thank you also. I mean that's very disappointing, really. I find if they don't sound as if they're being very cooperative. It was surely fairly easy to be cooperative on this sort of thing. So that is disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor White, did you want to come back? Or is that still legacy hand?
Just to say that if the map is accurate, which it does appear to be, then I'm okay because they are trees. But I do want to be certain that no scrub is covered, and as long as Mr. Lee can confirm that for me, because if there's any scrub in there, then I will absolutely object. So as long as it's trees and that's confirmed, then I'm okay with it.
Yes, I'm confident I got that confirmation. So, Mr. Lee, yes? No? Yes?
The Chairman. Yeah, it is trees. Obviously, there are woodland ones, but yeah, it is trees.
Fine, thank you. Right, I haven't anyone else wishing to speak. Have I missed anyone? So I will put the officer recommendation, which is to confirm. I'll just make sure I get the right wording. I've lost my place, but yes, I'm putting the recommendation to confirm tree preservation order TPO 6/20 without any modifications. Do I have a seconder? Please, please.
Second it.
All right, I had Councillor Bamford first, but thank you for all offers. I guess we better have a roll call, but I think I can see which way it's going. But Miss Katie, could we please have a roll call?
Thank you, Chairman. So we're voting to confirm the TPO without modification. Members, if you could, I'll take your names in alphabetical order. Please could you indicate whether you are for, against or abstain? Starting with Councillor Bamford, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Durham? Oh, no. Sorry.
No, sorry, he went.
Councillor Mrs. Fleming.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis.
You're muted, Councillor.
Apologies. For.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morley.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Siddle.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Thompson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Miss White.
For.
Thank you. Chairman, that's 7 for, none against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much. So that tree preservation order is confirmed. Item 7 on the agenda is any other items of business the chairman of the committee decides are urgent. As I've already said, there are none. So in a moment I will close the meeting, but again I'm going to repeat my thanks to the officers, all the officers of all departments. Thank you very much for all your hard work over the year and a chunk. Thank you, members, for your all your contributions. I'm going to draw this meeting to a close at 19:10. Thank you all. As the meeting is now closed,